All right, guys. So today we're going to be talking about anger and anxiety. So specifically, how do you process anger when you struggle with anxiety? Now, there's 1,000 ways to mismanage anger, but in this video, I'm going to be talking about specifically people who struggle with anxiety, social anxiety, and as a result, they become highly conflict avoidant. So how do these people manage and navigate through their anger? So first things first, I'm going to show you some signs of unprocessed anger. The first one is hypersensitivity. So becoming overly affected and holding on to criticism and inconveniences for long periods of time. So struggling to really let things go. Second is having sudden tantrums and going from a 0 to 100. So having outbursts from seemingly nowhere. Being calm one moment and then having a complete fit and raging another moment. Third is misplaced anger. So getting frustrated and snapping at people unnecessarily. People who haven't done anything to you, people who've never been the object of your anger or annoyance in the past. And lastly is disrespectfully expressing anger. So letting your anger control you and influence your behavior because you're inexperienced with actually managing your anger. And as a result, when you feel anger, it controls you entirely. So in this video, I'm going to share with you how to identify your specific anger pattern. And I'm also going to give you a couple exercises on how to process your anger according to your specific anger pattern. But before I jump right in, let me introduce myself. For those who are new here, my name is Asha, and I work with introverted professionals who struggle with social anxiety. And I analyze their personality and help them uncover deep-rooted negative patterns so that they can stop people-pleasing, confidently express themselves, and find their natural assertiveness. All right, so from working with people who struggle with anxiety, I've noticed that there are two categories when it comes to anger: the active anger category and the passive anger category. So in the active anger, these people tend to over-identify with their anger. So they still don't express their anger during the situation. So say they're upset at work, their boss is, yelling at them or being rude to them. They don't express their anger during, but what they do is they rant to themselves when they're alone or to their friends and family. And while they are ranting, they end up bringing past issues to really fuel their anger and really make things a lot bigger than they really are. And this can be a long process, really exhausting and really tiring. And as a result, most of the time, they end up feeling shame for overreacting because people who they rant to end up saying you might be overreacting because they notice that you're bringing up past issues. On top of that, after you might even feel like you're shaming yourself because after a week or a month, you've noticed, you look back and you're like, oh my goodness, I've been, upset about this for a whole month. And so you shame yourself for overreacting. And as a result of feeling ashamed, you end up putting your anger in a box and shoving it away and never looking at it again. Now, for passive anger, these people abandon their anger entirely. So they're highly conflict avoidant, even within themselves. And so what they do to rationalize toxic behavior is they belittle themselves. So if their boss is being exceptionally rude to them and unfair, what they do is they end up thinking, okay, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I deserve to be treated that way, so that they don't actually have to feel angry or feel wronged. And as a result of doing this continuously, they go through depressive cycles, a lot of apathy, a lot of lack of energy, because the anger, it's still there, but it's in the background. It's taking up a lot of energy. So they can be very passive aggressive and stubborn. Now, even though both of these, passive anger and active anger, they look so different on the outside, they have the same core issue, which is an unhealthy relationship with anger. So one thing you gotta know is it's fluid. You can be active anger at home. You can have active anger at home and passive anger at work, or vice versa. You can have active anger with certain topics and passive anger with other topics. It's completely fluid. And most people ask, why do we develop these type of anger patterns? So cultural conditioning is a big one. A lot of cultures say it's wrong to be angry. You shouldn't be angry. And as a result, we repress a lot of our anger. It could be absent or unhealthy parenting, especially absent parenting. They don't teach you how to handle your anger. Unhealthy parenting, where they shame you for expressing your anger. And lastly is as a trauma response. If you grew up in an abusive household, especially passive anger ends up becoming your default mode of how to handle anger, because you don't want to add to the to the instability and violence at home. So first things first, if you want to fix this, we have to have some ground rules on how we actually deal with anger. So the perspective on how we view anger. So the first thing is, anger is not a bad emotion. Now, I used to vilify anger for the longest time because I expressed it so badly. And on top of that, I would be the victim of other people expressing it really badly. So I naturally thought, okay, anger is a horrible emotion, but that belief should be thrown out the window right now. Anger should be treated like every other emotion, embraced and understood, because anger is there for a reason. A lot of times your anger is activated due to witnessing injustice or discrimination, and often it's also activated when you feel like you are being discriminated against. So in a way, anger is there to look out for you. And the next one is, you can feel anger without acting on it. So I, for the longest time, once again, thought that acting out your anger is feeling your anger, but these are two separate things. Processing your anger and feeling your anger is one thing, and expressing your anger is another thing. And because I expressed my anger terribly and I was a victim of people expressing their anger terribly, I naturally thought that anger is, you feel it means you're going to act on it, but these are not the same things. In fact, when you act on your anger, it's actually because you don't feel your anger and you don't process your anger. So if you process and you feel your anger, you don't need to act on it and act disrespectfully because you're being controlled by it. Now, lastly is, the more you avoid it, the bigger it becomes. I actually have a good analogy for this, which is, say you're in a classroom with a friend and the teacher is writing something on the board, and now your friend whispers a joke to you. You both start giggling. Then the teacher turns around and snaps at the both of you and say, hey, stop giggling. Now goes back to writing on the board, and both of you just need to laugh even more. Even though the joke wasn't even that funny in the first place, now you just feel like you just need to laugh. You're dying on the inside to laugh out loud. So this is pretty much what happens when you try to stuff your anger. The more you avoid it, the bigger it becomes. The need to express it becomes way bigger, and you end up overreacting, actually making your anger a lot bigger than it actually is because you keep stuffing it down. So you end up feeling more anger than necessary for a given issue. So the more you avoid it, the bigger it becomes. So anger is not a bad emotion. You can feel your anger without acting on it. And in fact, if you feel your anger, you probably won't act on it. And lastly is, the more you avoid it, the bigger it becomes. So these are the ground rules when it comes to how you need to observe and approach your anger. So the first step is that you have to identify which patterns you engage in which areas of your life. Like I said before, are you active at work and passive at home? Are you active with certain topics? Figure out where you engage which patterns. Generally, I have found that people tend to gravitate mostly to one category. So if you're active, you're mostly active in most parts of your life. And if you're passive, same thing. Most parts of your life, you're also probably passive. So when it comes to active anger, what's really going on here is a lack of validation. And what you end up doing without realizing it is, you set your friends and family as validation. So when you rant to them, immediately let's just say something bad happens at work. Your boss was really, really rude to you and really unfair in the way they've been treating you. So you feel horrible. You go back home and you start calling up your friends and saying, ranting for hours about how upset you are about your boss. So what's happening is, you're setting them as validation without even realizing. And because you don't realize it, these benchmark for your feelings validated is very unclear. You don't even know what feeling validated even means. And here's the thing, your friends and family, even though they might be very empathetic and they care about you, they don't know what it's like to be you. They don't know the exact situation. So not only would they probably not get the full picture of how you feel, you also don't really know what it's like to feel validated. So now you're putting a lot of pressure on them to make you feel like you have the right to be angry. And you can see how that can go wrong. So think about how inefficient this is. You're setting your friends and family as validation without really recognizing what that means. And on top of that, you're also expecting them to fully make you feel like you have the right to be angry when they don't even know exactly what it feels like to have gone through what you went through. Then the last part is a lack of action. So this one is a big one as well, not taking action towards taking care of your anger. So what you got to do is, first things first, if you got active anger, is you've got to set your own validation as the benchmark. This is probably the most important point here. Even though it feels good to rant to friends and family, at the end of the day, you should be the only person who validates your anger. You have to realize you have the right to be angry, and no one's going to take that away from you. If you're upset with something at work, you're upset with something at work. You don't need your friends and family to say, yeah, that person really wronged you. Because what happens, like I said, if you end up setting other people as the benchmark for validation, it's going to get really, really messy. Now, the next one is write down what you're angry about. Now, I know that you've heard this advice a lot, and it is actually great advice. It's very different from just mumbling to yourself about how upset you are. Writing it down is very cathartic, and you're able to see and look back at what you've written. It almost solidifies your anger and puts it right in front of you, so you can see that, okay, it's out there right now. I feel it, I'm looking at it, and it's right here. So once you've done that, take a breather, then come back to read what you've written. So once you've calmed down, go and read what you've written and notice certain habits. Now that your emotions are calmed down and you're not as angry, you're able to notice certain habits. So are you adding fuel, using things from the past and adding fuel? Are you over empathizing with whatever's happening around you, with the people that hurt you? Are you victimizing yourself, overly victimizing yourself? Notice certain habits that you tend to fall into. And lastly, create an action step. So this is very important. All of these need to be done. So creating an action step that basically looks out for you. So I know this seems relatively simple, but navigating through your emotions should not be some complex thing to do. Healthy emotional processing should not be overly complicated. So here's the basic formula. Expression, so getting it all out. Then self-validation. You have the right to feel that way, and that's because you give yourself the right, not because anyone else validated you. Balance, so being clear and objective, looking back at what kind of things that you might have, what kind of bad habits you might have done while you're angry. Are you over empathizing? Are you over victimizing? Are you adding fuel? All these things, trying to balance it out so you can be clear and objective as possible with your anger or any other feeling, really. And lastly is action, standing up for yourself. So creating an action step that looks out for the anger that you feel. So most people, sometimes they just do the action. They do the expression, then they do the action. They don't do that self-validation. They don't do the balance. So their action could be vengeful, could be a little bit too intense. And then they wonder where they went wrong. It's because you didn't self-validate, which naturally through self-validation, you cool yourself off. You become comfortable with your anger because you're not fighting to have the right to be angry. And number two is they didn't balance it out. They didn't notice all the bad habits that they were doing because they didn't take the time to take a breather and then look back at what they've written and see where they have added fire and added fuel and being overly victimized themselves. So now with passive anger, their main issue is the complete abandonment of anger. It's very energy draining because of all that repression that's going on. As a result, they're highly out of touch with themselves because, like I said, anger it's a side of you that really looks out for you. So when you completely abandon that, you end up becoming really out of touch with yourself, because in a way, if you're not looking out for yourself, you have to ignore yourself. Self-deprecating thought patterns. So naturally, because you have to rationalize toxic behavior, you end up having thought patterns that cater to other people's toxic behavior towards you. And lack of action once again. So what people with passive anger needs to do is, firstly, change your relationship with anger. Remember the ground rules? These people need to focus on the ground rules a lot. You can't be vilifying anger. You have to understand anger is the side of you that looks out for you. Anger is very much necessary. Your anger exists when you see people you love being mistreated. Same thing. Your anger is activated when you get mistreated. So the problem with people who struggle with passive anger is they can't actually think of moments where they got angry because they didn't allow themselves to be angry. So what I found very useful is I asked them to think of memories where you felt small, embarrassed, or insecure. So whenever they think of memories that evoke these type of emotions, then I ask them to write it down and focus on anger. So sometimes what I do is I ask them to think about these memories and replace it's you with someone you love and they're going through what you went through, do you feel anger coming up? Like, no, this is completely wrong. They shouldn't be treated that way. If most of the time they usually say yes. And so I said, now think about that's you. You're supposed to feel that anger. So really focusing on anger, really focusing on how you should have looked out for yourself in that moment, how you have been mistreated, and really getting angry about it, really get in touch with feeling the injustice. Now, once again, take a breather, then come back to read. Notice certain habits. Once again, are you adding fuel? Because even though you're like, how can they add fuel? Usually when they really think about it, when they think about those memories where they felt insecure or embarrassed or small, and once they get in the flow of writing, it can get really intense because they've stuffed it for so long. So they still have to do the habit where they have to notice, are they adding fuel? Are they victimizing themselves? And lastly, they have to create an action step. So once again, it's expression, it's self-validation, noticing that I have the right to feel this way. Then it's taking a breather, coming back, and being clear and objective as possible. And lastly is taking an action step that looks out for yourself and your anger. So this could be small, this could be big. For example, the boss example I gave earlier, it could be asking for a short chat with your boss to bring up your concerns when it comes to how they treat you. Maybe mentioning that you don't like the phrasing, or mentioning that you prefer they spoke to you a certain way. I just realized that my video has been covering the last part of the processing, but I'm not going to retake this entire video. I am going to keep it, what's going to roll with it. It's a harmless mistake. I'm sure you understood what was up there. So remember that all of this, step 1 to step 4, all of this needs to be done in that specific order. You can't just do the action. You can't just do the expression. It has to be done. Expression, self-validation, balance, and action. Now, I hope this video has been useful for you guys. I hope that it's given you some clarity on how to better process your anger when struggling with anxiety. And as per usual, if any of you guys would love to work with me to overcome your anxiety and learn how to better create meaningful professional relationships and find your natural assertiveness, feel free to book a strategic call with me. The link is in the description. I will talk to you guys soon.